down 27 points at the early open. Right, let's get more now. David Costa, Dean of the Robert Kennedy College, and he joins us live out of Zurich. David, I really want to start on the Ukraine. My first question to you is, how high would you rate the risk of a sovereign default? Nomura are putting it at 29%. Could it be higher?
Well, I think 29% is pretty much already a high risk. I don't see that this will be let go as a disruption for Europe. So I think the risk of 29% that Nomura puts it's already pretty much very high. So I see pretty much no major impact here in Europe. But a default, it is possible indeed, and it's good to think about this possible risk, especially when markets already had a pretty good run and they're looking for some excuses to have a big retreat from here. So that is something certainly I would like to watch at the moment.
What about the broader impact on European stock markets and the euro? If that scenario does eventuate, David, isn't there going to be a contagion ripple effect into the Eastern European markets, into Central Europe, and ultimately the region as a whole? Or am I painting out a worst-case scenario here?
Well, I think it is quite possible that if that happens, there will be some repercussion throughout Eastern European markets. But at the same time, again, I try to be a bit optimistic here, and I don't see that Europe will just stand still when there will be such a big default. So there might be some solution to a potential default just because of what you mentioned, the ripple effect that may have throughout Eastern Europe and Europe as a whole. So I do expect some sort of planning and intervention, even as we speak, to avoid this type of default.
David, it's Richard in Sydney here. With this Ukraine and a potential for a default, how do you read the stress testing that has gone on for banks in Europe? And is this actually going to be a live test of which of these banks have got adequate view of their bond portfolio?
Well, I think the stress test overall will perform well because at least there is a lot of preparation for the stress test. So many of the banks are ready, actually, and there will be a few failures because a few failures have to be there. But certainly, our evaluation of what the bond portfolio risk is overall for banks, particularly sovereigns, is going to take place. And that it will certainly be a bad scenario if we had a European, Eastern European default like Ukraine now come into the picture while we are preparing for those stress tests, where we need no surprises from now until September, and that's very important to avoid any type of last-minute default surprise like this, which will certainly have a disruption and impacts on the banks, particularly those banks heavily exposed to Eastern Europe, like some of the Austrian banks and some of the German banks as well. So I think in that regard, that might have an impact. But beside that, stress tests are pretty much going to be a positive exercise to reinforce the strength of the banking sector in Europe.
And David, for the inflation that is on the agenda today in Europe, German IFO as well, if they undershoot expectations, then how badly do you think the euro could be affected?
Well, there could be some effect. I don't expect a major surprise here because we had already a lot of data, a lot of readings into this. So there could be some impact on the short term on the euro indeed, but we are still on the same stalling situation, particularly through the situation of inflation and stimulus and how much is going to be gone by the ECB. So it's still, I don't expect a huge surprise figure, but of course we have to watch out this. We have to watch out the development in Ukraine as well, and all the data which is coming through because of the great performance the European markets had, and also the sentiment of investors that Europe is the better place to be, excluding now for the moment investing in emerging markets and also the US, which is all-time highs. So that is the reason why investors are still a bit wary. So any surprise will drive a pullback throughout Europe.
All right, David, got to leave it there, sir. Thank you very much indeed for your time today. David Costa, Dean of the Robert Kennedy College.